Okay, looks like we're recording and online. So I'm joined here with the Reverend Molly Short, who I know as Molly, and we're glad to have you with us to share some of your story about vocation. And Molly, we met each other at seminary, and so that was in 2014. Was that in 2014? You started there. Tell us, as people may not understand about people who get their MDivs and then go to like an Anglican year. Can you tell us a little bit of how you ended up at Sewanee?
Sure, of course. So I was, I think this is actually folds into the vocation thing nicely, because for me, vocation has always unfolded in really like accidental ways.
Yeah.
So I started seminary at Duke Divinity School before I was in a formal ordination process. And then while I was at Duke Divinity getting a 3-year Master's of Divinity, I started the process with the Diocese of North Carolina. I'm originally from Mobile, Alabama, so grew up Diocese of Central Gulf Coast. And you know, my sense of calling to this particular kind of ministry really kind of unfolded as I was learning about what it means. And always that clarity that came from, and the affirmation in that vocation came from doing that kind of work and studying theology. And so what that meant though is that even though I'm a lifelong Episcopalian, I was required to complete a diploma in Anglican studies at a university or at a seminary that's an Episcopal institution. Duke Divinity is a Methodist institution. Although some Episcopal priests do train there. My bishop, who's Michael Curry at the time, before he became presiding bishop, had me go to Sewanee to just get a little something extra. It was really great too, because I was going through this process. I went from college to seminary to this diploma program. And so it also provides some useful growth time for me, actually.
Yeah, so you got your Master of Divinity, which is a requirement for all Episcopal priests, and you completed that, and then you went to Sewanee for a year of Anglican studies.
Yes.
And so that's where you and I met, and then we had a very formative time at clinical pastoral education, where we were chaplains at a hospital for a summer, and that was intense and informative. But
Yes.
we really grew as a team, and of our other peer from seminary. We were there together through that experience, so it really brought us together in of our chaplain group. So it's fun to be able to chat and talk about vocation with you.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, thanks. So vocation, it's typically thought of in religious terms as far as someone might have a vocation to the priesthood or a monastic vocation. What would you say or describe vocation as, or what comes to your mind when you hear the word vocation? How would you describe it for us?
Yeah. So I can't get very far from my upbringing. My mother's a Latin teacher, and so I have to talk to you about the Latin root of the word,
Right.
which is calling, vocare, to call. So, you know, of course, calling also comes to mind. It comes to mind first. But for me personally, you know, I frequently, actually, I haven't frequently heard these, but I can think of a few moments in my life where I've spoken to people who say they have really kind of knock down on your back, Paul light moment where they hear the voice of the Lord. He might sound like Morgan Freeman. God, she might sound different. But I never had anything like that. I've experienced, my experience of call has really been nudges. And nudges that were both internal and external, having a person say, you know, well, have you ever considered this option for your next step? Or getting to do something and realizing like how much it made me feel alive and how I really felt like I was able to contribute the gifts that I bring, not in a way that is kind of egocentric, but in a way that is affirming, and the kind of joy you get from giving something when you know you're giving genuinely from your heart and not from wanting to appear magnanimous, but just like really able to give freely in that way. So there's things that come to mind with the word calling. I had a friend who told me that he was sitting in a chapel at one point and praying before the cross, and that the cross spoke to him. And I'm so envious of that. But that's never been the case for me. And as I've continued living longer, I don't really envy that anymore, because I think God speaks very loudly in these little nudges that we get every day.
Yeah, I think that's great and helpful. I think because some people do have these kind of real neon lights, this real dramatic thing. And of course, we think about scriptural figures like Paul on the road to Damascus, or St. Francis. He was also in the church. We saw, Christ speak to him from the cross. But there's also, I think, many more untold stories of those nudges of being led to wonder and kind of feel things out a little bit. So what do you think about vocations? Can you have more than one? Because sometimes I hear people speak about this one thing you find, and then I've heard other people freely talk, well, you can have multiple. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm certainly of the mind that we all have, that our vocations can change, and that we often are operating with several different vocations at once. I'm a daughter to my parents. I'm a sister to my brother. I'm a mother to my son. And all of those things are held together. And I'm a priest of the church. They're all somehow held together in the self. And a good friend of mine who was really formative for me in discerning a call to the priesthood, but also what it means to be a priest in the world right now, she would frequently tell me that God never places competing vocations in our lives, that God would never call us away from something that we're already called to, but that sometimes the thing we have to figure out is finding the balance in those, and giving the proper responsibility and weight and time and love to all of the many callings that God's placed on your life.
Yeah, no, that's great. Maybe some folks feel like a pressure of they haven't found that one thing they're supposed to do. And like you said, you're already inhabiting different ways God's called you to live and shaped you in a certain way. I think that can be helpful, and hopefully that helps all of us as we think about the rest of our lives and what might develop for us as far as vocations. So this might launch us more into just kind of your story more, but
sure.
How did you find out what your vocation is or your vocations are? And, you mentioned your priest and daughter and mother, and maybe just talk about some of that and how that developed for you, learning to inhabit those, but also discovering the ones that you were being led into. And maybe tell us you mentioned where you're from, but maybe a little bit about, the beginning, the origin story of Molly Short.
Yeah. Oh, we got like a 2 hours for this, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and I come from a family where if you have the intellectual ability, you become a doctor, because that is the family business of sorts. And it's, I never questioned that anyone would love me less, or that I would be kicked out of the family if I didn't choose that. Like that was never on the table. but there was always this kind of implied, like, our people have a calling, and that's to care for the sick, if you can. And so, I did feel some pretty, I experienced a good deal of like turmoil and conflict in my early adult life when, I was really excelling at science classes. I'm actually a science major. I graduated with a degree in earth and environmental science from Furman University. And, it was very hard for me to not pursue that call. And my call has been, I even hesitate to call it like a singular call. Like the journey has been so meandering. And just like this story is getting really meandering. But, I think when I think about trying to like trace out the big picture, I found myself having a lot of trouble at several key moments in my life, say at, the moment where I was graduating from high school, the moment where I was graduating from college, where I had a tremendous difficulty separating out my desires from what, like my God-given desires, like, the desires that when you live more fully into, you have that kind of affirmation from the Holy Spirit that you are like doing this good work and it's for the good of others. And so I had trouble separating out like that, those desires from like my desire to please other people, my desire to perform for the sake of performing, to make certain people or certain groups proud or help them to be impressed by me and what I do. But when I could begin to separate out those two things, that was probably the most important thing for me. So I had the big pivot point that was a big shock to my family was when I decided to go to Duke Divinity immediately after finishing up college. And, my family had been patient with me through the environmental science thing. So like, okay, at least we're still in the sciences. And when I told them I was going to seminary, it was a very big shock because my family it was something they didn't know anything about. So again, realizing that like, what had led me to that decision was that I stepped back and I looked at my life and where my time was going, where my energy was going, and what I'd love to do and what I would do for free. Like I was really involved in a college campus ministry called Mere Christianity Forum, which was a group dedicated to the intellectual exploration of faith and ethics. And I was on the student board and I was organizing book studies and I was reaching out to students who were having a hard time and bringing them to our community house for meals. And I was helping plan prayer services. And, it's one of those things where like anyone looking in from the outside would be like, oh, she clearly likes this stuff. But it was so I couldn't see it until I had a good friend of mine who's the college campus minister who just asked me like, have you considered going to Divinity School? And it was that question that just kind of like lodged in my imagination. I couldn't shake it. And so I applied and I was accepted. And then I told my family and they were they had a very hard time accepting that at first. But you know what, in this really beautiful way, God has redeemed that. My family is fully supportive of what I do. And now that they get to see me live into it and they see that not only does this work give me life, but that I can contribute something to help, encourage other people and be with others when they're in this really difficult moment, and just be able to give my life to being there for people in that way. My family's really become very affirming of it. So, I think when I think about the trajectory and all of the twists and turns, like my environmental science degree was not a mistake. It was actually a really important step, because if I had not done that, I would not have realized that that was not it.
Yeah.
Also spent a summer, oh gosh, I spent a summer doing my research for my senior thesis on soil phosphorus levels in a runoff field that was from a confined animal feeding operation. So it's, anyways, that was probably like, it only took me 2 weeks of that summer internship to realize like, this isn't it. But I stuck with it and I finished it, and that was clarifying. So even that moment, like God redeems all of those moments. Like God will use all of that to continue leading us step by step.
Wow. I think it's really interesting too. You said, I love that you're spending all your time or a lot of time and your energy at the campus ministry, and these things you said I would do for free. I love doing it. It was life-giving for you. And you were being a pastor, you're pastoring, peers and helping folks and trying to really be invested in their spiritual life. But it's funny, like you said, you weren't necessarily aware of it, but someone from the outside observer say, hey, it might make sense for you to think about spending your life doing this thing that you're so involved and passionate about and had gifts for. So I think that's also something too, that maybe it's not something that you get zapped with, but it's maybe just a recognition of what you're already kind of passionate about doing.
Right.
I think that sticks out to me a lot. Growing up, you'd grown up Episcopalian. Had you ever imagined yourself being a professional religious person?
No. Heck no, Jamie. I want to have friends. No. Short answer, no. I actually didn't. Truthfully, I think it was more, another thing I think about a lot when I think about vocation and some of the challenges we face with figuring that out is that, sometimes it really is a lack of imagination. I had no imagination for what a woman would look like because I'd never met one.
So you'd never had a woman who was an Episcopal priest for you?
Yeah. No. And it's not like there weren't women out there. Women were ordained, 1979, right? So the 11 were in 79. The first 11.
I think 79 or somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yes. No, I want to say 79 or 76, but like 76 was the bicentennial. So it's like, we'll look it up and we'll confirm later.
Yeah.
Look them up. Amazing women. But I had no imagination for it yet.
Wow.
I feel very mindful too that, I think sometimes when people hear certain folks talk about vocation, like you watch a documentary on Johnny Cash or Dolly Parton, my personal heroes, that's why I'm slipping them in there. Or you talk to, say, someone who's a priest and you think like, oh, well, yes, that vocation, it's going to be so obvious that they have like a calling. But I really do believe, like I work with some teachers I'm a school chaplain, and I work with some teachers and coaches who are absolutely called to that work, who do incredible things for young people. When we were in CPE, we worked alongside nurses and doctors who were called to that work. So, just to be clear, like this is, it's not that priests are the only ones with callings.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Different.
That's awesome. Yeah. Everyone has a calling and multiple callings, and how do we live into those? And I think in the Episcopal Church, we're really heavy on the clergy. We talk about discernment and calling, and part of why I'm doing this course is my announcement to the church that I had discerned a call to the Air Force chaplaincy, and so that's why it's on my head, in my head right now. And then, our rector, our rector John Leach, who's come in, felt a calling to this place. So we speak about discernment and calling on the clergy side, but I don't know if a lot of people on the lay side think about that. And it's
Right.
part of it is just to show everyone that we're all discerning, and how God is calling each one of us to live our own lives. And so, yeah, and I think it's just so far hearing your story, it just will help all of us just kind of dispel some of the things about calling and learn
I hope
some
so.
of the insights. Yeah, totally. And I really appreciate the meandering, the nudges, the wondering, because I think that's much more relatable to the majority of people rather than these lightning bolt type of dramatic moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will, one last thing I will say to you is that probably one of the best things that could have ever happened to me was my calling into my marriage relationship with my husband.
Mm.
As you know, he's a very, very skilled teacher. He does our outdoor programming and leadership programming here at St. Andrew Sewanee School. But he always is just such a fantastic anchor to me to like pull me back and remind me that like he has a calling too. Like he has a very essential calling to be a person of faith who's not ordained, who models what the life of faith looks like in your day-to-day grind. When you're working a job and sometimes you don't want to be there and you got to show up to these meetings and there's that person that just keeps talking. You treat them with grace and respect and love.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the beauty of what Jesus calls us to is that at the end of the day, like your job and your calling are not the same. Like what you get paid to do in your vocation, that, you know, that might align or it might not.
Mm. Molly, so maybe talk about a little bit too, how did you discern that? Because some people, when they think about relationship, they're like, hey, I was really attracted to this person, we started dating and we hit it off. Or it seemed like you had more of a openness about it maybe, or maybe you didn't. What was that like for you?
Yeah. I'm just going to trust that Michael's not going to watch this.
Okay.
I think, let's see. Part of one of the most like formative ways that I have of thinking about this is, goes back to Rowan Williams and his article, The Body's Grace, where he talks about committed long-term relationships that we see in the marriage covenant as ways that we are trained up in the school of discipleship. So, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges that we face not only as people of faith, but also just in our culture, there can be this very strong, like love and romantic love is like, you know, you fall in love. Like, it's like you tripped over it and you fell, like it's not control. But I think in my experience, and like, you know, I have to, like, full disclosure, I'm not a romantic. Like, I don't think there's a one and only person for you and for me. But I think there are better and worse compatibilities for sure. Like, no questions there. There may be certain personality traits that would be particularly challenging for you to be in relationship with. But, you know, I think what's more important to that is a shared understanding of what the relationship is for. Even if that changes over time. I mean, something that Michael and I frequently talk about, you know, we both went into our relationship. We started dating in college, and we both had before then had decided we weren't going to date in college. Like we didn't have expectations for this relationship to stick around. Not because we didn't care deeply for each other, but just because, you know, we were in college in a culture that really emphasized like this very highly romanticized idea of romantic love. But you know, what I felt called to in my relationship with Michael was like, I felt very, very drawn to the way he cared about things that I cared about. we shared a deep commitment to, and we still do, we share a deep commitment to creation care and trying to live simply and sustainably. And, you know, of course, I find Michael very attractive, obviously, but it's one of those things where, you know, I'm also really firm believer that, you know, our sense of attraction to a certain person can really grow over time. That it's personality that can make people so beautiful to us. Who they choose to be in moments of crisis and hardship and all that stuff. I think in a lot of ways, Michael and I too just got really lucky. We, in some ways, like, yeah, we did kind of just trip over each other and like ended up in a really good spot, but we are lucky that from the early on, we communicated about those things we cared about most and how we wanted to structure our life together. More than just like, you know, do we want to live in a single story house or a double story house? It was more like, you know, what do you care most deeply about? Like, how should we decide what our life looks like? We actually lived in a Catholic worker community when we first got married. So we lived in a house where we were living in an intentional relationship with folks who were trying to get back on their feet after living in the streets. And man, felt so lucky to find someone who's committed to that too. And who would continue to challenge me in that.
Awesome. Yeah, and you know, as you talk about Michael and your relationship, I think that's another thing you're bringing out about vocation too, is romantically how that manifests. Sometimes when people think about the will of God, there's that one person out of all the billions of people on earth that God wants me to be in relationship with in this specific way. And you're talking about God's will being more possibilities from what I'm hearing of just, I think there's sometimes a real anxiety when we start talking about discerning what God wants from me. It gets really to this like tightrope that has to be this exact path, and I'm either on it or off of it. But you're talking more maybe an understanding of there are multiple paths or possibilities. And it seemed like in that, the one you find, you're trying to please and serve God and others in that path you've chosen, but you haven't just designated that one only possibility is when I could serve God. It's right. A spectrum.
Right.
I think that's helpful.
Yeah. That certainly is how I found it. I had the same mentor who like asked me like, have you thought about Divinity School? Once we were talking about that too, because I was like, you know, I don't know what God's will for me is right now. And he just said like, well, you know, like God's giving you a sandbox. He just wants you to play in the sandbox.
Awesome.
You know, there's so many good things to be done and so many different ways to do them. The trick is figuring out, you know, what you can do and how you can contribute, and then looking out and seeing what's needed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that reminds me too, each of us, you know, in our baptism, we make these promises and to live a specific way. But the particulars of that are so varied and different. So living in the way of Jesus, loving God, loving others, fulfilling our baptismal covenant, it's kind of the will of God that we've designated for each one of us. But then how does that get manifested? It's so different. And I think that's part of just discovering it. Okay, so one of the main things is one of your vocations is a chaplain at St. Andrew's. Can you tell us a little bit just about the school? It's a day and boarding school. And then just kind of walk us through some of the particulars of you living in that role. You've got other roles too in vocations, but this one specifically, what does that look like day to day, nuts and bolts type thing for you?
Sure, yeah, thanks. So as you mentioned, St. Andrew's Sewanee School is a grades 6 through 12 boarding school in Sewanee, Tennessee. And we are, we're co-ed, and we have been on the plateau since 1868. So the origins of our school, we're formed as a merger. Our origin schools are St. Andrew's, which was a school started by monks who were Order of the Holy Cross, who are committed to providing educational opportunities for poor mountain boys. So St. Andrew's, St. Mary's, who you all may know from St. Mary's Convent. The sisters provided the same educational opportunities for girls. And then the Swanee Military Academy, which was an organization that was part of the University of the South and was formed obviously after the Civil War. And our school merged to become St. Andrew's Swanee School in 1981. And what my particular role looks like in this community, ever since our founding, we've been firmly planted in the Episcopal tradition. So that looks like having a weekly Eucharist worship together, committing ourselves to providing education in the religions and faith traditions of the world, and using our Episcopal identity to shape all aspects of our life. So remaining committed to openness and trust and forgiveness as key operating values, letting our faith shape how we handle disciplinary issues, that we don't simply punish a student when a student makes a mistake, but we try to foster opportunities for the student to learn, to repair any relationships that may have been broken when they did something that harmed themselves or other people. Now, of course, you may be wondering, like, well, how do you provide parameters? Like, it's not that we don't have parameters and consequences, but we try to reframe it so that when we think about and talk about what we do as a school, we're committing to the formation of young people to be ethical, to be faithful, and to really care about the people that they are becoming, that they become the people that God needs in the world.
That's awesome. And so it's 6 to 12 grades, co-ed. And how many folks do you have who come for the day? And then how many people do you have who board there for school?
Yeah, so given, of course, COVID has changed everything. And just like a lot of different schools who are boarding schools, our numbers have fluctuated depending upon, gosh, and I know your people are so aware of this, but so many folks are having real financial hardship that our numbers have gone down a little bit. But so right now we have a little over 50 boarding students and about 150, 160 day students. The boarders are 8th through 12th grade and the day students are 6th through 12th. So boarding really starts in 8th grade for us. Yeah, but it's, one of the great strengths about this during COVID right now is that because we are so small, we can really create a bubble, like a safe bubble that is quarantined. And we have an incredible campus. I know I mentioned earlier that my husband's the outdoor program director. So one of the things that we are uniquely poised to offer at this time is a safe place for children to be, where they can be outside and really taking advantage of learning in the natural world. And we're so small that we can properly isolate and use our classroom space as well so that we minimize the chance of contagion. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, and you have a unique role, you and Michael, because you guys are really embedded in the community in a specific way. I think that would really be kind of eye-opening for us to hear your involvement in the community as a chaplain there.
Sure, absolutely. We live on campus. So as a boarding community, we have residential houses. We live with the students. So before I took on the lead chaplain role, I was living in a women's dormitory in St. Mary's Warner and helping to care for and mentor 14 girls, grades 9 through 12. So we try to very intentionally structure all of our residential houses in these little pods so that you do have a family attached to each one to continue that kind of really important like formation and just TLC that you get from family when you're living apart from your family. So we, Michael and I have now moved to the Chaplain's house, which is an intentional house set apart from the residential houses so that recognizing that the chaplain's role is one in which you need to be immediately available to all of the student body at all times. So we, just like all the residential faculty, we eat all of our meals with the boarding students. And so in a lot of ways, they become an extension of our family. They often help, like, one of the things that I find so like wonderful and special about being here is that our 2-year-old son, Ezra, gets to go to the dining hall and gets to be like carried around and played with by students from Rwanda and China and Jamaica. We love that Ezra gets to grow up in this community where he sees that God's family is like way bigger than our little nuclear family, but like they're all these people who are mean so much to us, who we're committed to living together with intentionality.
That's really awesome. And two, just the international reach you have there at St. Andrews is something I even forget about. Like you said, these nations represented. That's really cool. So I don't know if there's a typical day for you, but kind of someone looking from the outside, what would you tell them about your life? What's kind of your schedule, your responsibilities, your roles there? Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So this is where, I feel like whenever I talk about what a day in the life might look like, this is where like my therapist in my head is like, you might be overworking a little. But the nature of this work is that it is seasonal, right? So we're a school. It's August, which means we're working a lot. But I get to be near my family, and my family gets to be present while I'm working as well. So not when I'm teaching, obviously. My son is at daycare during the day, but when I am, say, just catching up with students at the end of the day, he's with me. So typical day in the life is, starting off with chapel. So I will arrive early to the chapel to set it up for our weekly Eucharist. Unfortunately, we're not doing the Eucharist at this time out of an abundance of caution with COVID. So it'll be a daily prayer service. We will gather, virtually, to pray together. And then we will go to classes, and students will go through the normal class day schedule with everything from pottery to music production to British literature and algebra and history of Africa. And then in my role within the school day, I teach a course called Introduction to Religious Studies, which is it's a senior capstone course for all of our 12th graders. And really this is where I feel like I really am, there are always moments where you feel kind of closer and further away from your vocation, like what you sense is your calling, but we're all in the ballpark here. For a while I was in charge of organizing field day. I don't feel called to that, y'all. Coming up with games so that we'd toss eggs and pop water balloons on each other, but it's really important for the students to see me do that stuff. But an area where I do feel like I'm fully living into my calling is when I get to teach Introduction to Religious Studies. In this course, we talk about the nature of thinking about religion itself. Like, what is faith? What is religion? Is it this kind of sociological phenomenon? Is it a psychological phenomenon? How do you even define what a religion is? And how does that look different from Eastern faith traditions to the Abrahamic faiths to everything in between, to Zoroastrianism and voodoo. So I get to teach that class, and it's one of my favorite things that I do, because it really is an opportunity to engage with students, not only to help them understand what other faith traditions believe, but also to help them begin to say what they believe. Because one of the beautiful things about this moment in time for them, if you're a senior about to graduate from high school, is that you may be questioning belief and faith for the first time. And it's such an exciting moment. I know that, I often talk to parents who are really anxious about it, because the faith has been so important to them and their formation in their life. And maybe they never really wavered from it, and that's fine too. But what I've seen is that when we give the space for the students to ask those hard questions, to journey far afield and explore different things, that it can make them more firmly grounded in the faith when they return to it. This is just this really essential identity formation moment for young people. We want them to have their own faith. I think about this a lot with my son. I had him baptized as a baby, and I fully intend to bring him to church with me as long as he'll go. But, I also look forward to that moment where he makes the decision for himself, because he has to do that.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, Molly. And I'm so glad you're there to have someone who's not threatened by students' questions, and a affirming presence and guide and someone who's thoughtful, who can kind of help people through that journey. That's awesome. And I'm glad you're there sharing. And of course, you've got all the pastoral care of students in formative lives, moments of their lives.
Yes. I'm sorry, I got very excited about the teaching part. Yes, I am also, I'm available as a chaplain to students who would never talk to a priest otherwise, honestly. I mean, it's just, it's one of the things I love about chaplaincy, is that, I get to have relationships with students who otherwise may never really give the Christian faith a chance. I get to be a spokesperson. I get to be someone who talks to them about Jesus, who's not telling them that, is yelling at them on the side of the road with a street sign, or with a sign saying repent or burn. Get to give that other way of being, that other narrative with your presence. And I really love that about being a chaplain.
Oh, that's awesome. I might have a couple more, just kind of more rapid fire questions that might help.
All right, let's go.
Let me just ask you this. Thinking back to that person in college who was saying, hey, have you ever considered about Divinity School? What do you think Molly back then would think about where you're at today if you told her, hey, this is what your life will look like? What would that have been like?
Oh, man. Be like, wow, really? Black all the time? For y'all, people from Mobile, oh my gosh, yes. I really
black all the time.
Yeah, all the time. First of all, it's really inconvenient if you live in the South. I mean, it's just so darn hot. As I told you earlier, Jamie, so I'm 21 weeks pregnant. So I've got the double thing of being pregnant and wearing clericals, and people are so confused. I think I'm a pregnant nun. I would not believe you if you told me I'd be doing this.
Yeah. That reminds me of in CPE, you had been ordained and was wearing your clericals and your black dress. And I think someone had said to you in the emergency room or somewhere in the hospital said, oh, they let the nuns out of the convent or something. They saw you. And, yeah.
Which is funny, because now, now that I know some nuns, I'm like, I'm not good enough to be a nun.
That's great. We're actually gonna we're having Sister Hannah part of these
Are
conversations from
you?
the convent.
Good.
And that's the thing
She
about
spoke to my
Swanee.
students too. She's great.
Oh, that's great. And just hearing the story about St. Andrews, Swanee
Mhm.
really is kind of an Episcopal Disneyland. You've got an Episcopal day and boarding school. You've got the university. You've got a convent. You've got a seminary there.
Mhm.
It's a really special place. Okay, a couple. So, and tying back to that about what you would have thought if someone had told you what your life and vocations would be like now, back in
Mhm.
your college days. I think one
Yeah.
thing is just kind of the unexpected of how it unfolds, but also, like you said,
Yes.
the lack of imagination or the possibilities were closed off to you of what you even could be. And part of
Mhm.
it seems like in your story, and I know in my story, is just saying, I feel drawn to this and being okay with that fact of being able to see myself in that.
Right.
There's that imposter syndrome too of whatever
Yes.
it is, whatever thing you're called to sometimes of like, oh my, can I really do this? Who do I think I am to do this? And
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't know. I think that really played out in your ways and some really played out in your life in some really great ways. Okay, a couple of questions that might be helpful just to hear what you think. Let's see. You've helped us with some misconceptions people might have about vocation. What would you say to someone who feels like they missed out on a vocation, not a vacation?
I've missed out on a vacation this summer. Have you?
Yeah. What would you say to someone who feels like they may have missed out on a vocation earlier in life, or
Mm.
somehow feel disqualified from finding a vocation now? And that could be for a whole host
Mm.
of reasons. Maybe someone felt like they had a real sense of calling to do something, but they didn't for whatever reason. Or maybe someone feels like they've done something that disqualifies them, or they're at a stage in life where they can't really think of like what they're supposed to be doing. What would you say to folks in those situations?
Oh gosh. I think so first if someone were to say they feel like they missed out, um well actually with both those, I think something that can be so challenging too when we talk about questions of vocation is that human beings are really mysterious. Like sometimes our decision making processes are not even clear to us. Sometimes we're simply reacting. And again, that's not always a bad thing, but I found that when I find myself getting reactive, that I need to pay attention, that there's something else going on there. If I feel like I'm just kind of responding to the next thing in a way that's not as thoughtful as I would like to be. Um, and I think that sometimes we can feel like we miss out on something because we're responding and reactive to pressures that feel outside of our control. Um, so I think about, I had a friend who, and then there are also those times where like sometimes you just get dealt a hard hand. I because of the circles I run in and the people I know people who have um, in some ways gone through the ordination process and been told no or not yet at different points, and that's a really hard thing to grapple with. Or even with even if it's not the ordination process, a job that you go through the interview process and you imagine yourself in the job um, and you're fully invested, and then you don't get it. Um, and it can be really, really challenging to see how God's at work in that. Um, because it drives me nuts when people say everything happens for a reason. Like, I don't buy that. I'm sorry. I don't. I know too many people who have just been slammed with tragedy after tragedy to believe that that's true. But I do think what God invites us into is choosing how we respond in the moment of crisis, in the moment of tragedy. Um, I think if someone told me that they feel like they missed out on their vocation, I would want to ask questions about like, well, what did you do in the intermediary time? Because, you know, have a friend who um, she got pregnant earlier than she had planned to, and she had planned on having this really ambitious career and to get a PhD and to teach at the college level, and it just didn't work out. But this unplanned thing that she felt like she missed out on something essential to her experience led to this beautiful human life and a child that has continued to be a gift to her again and again. And so I refuse to accept that as having missed out. Like, now, did she have the capacity to get a PhD? Absolutely. Like, was she qualified? Would she have been great at it? Sure, she would have. But you know what? Like, the life circumstances go that way. Hi, I know. Just give me a minute. I know. Just give me a minute.
That's fine. And we'll wrap up here in a minute. I think that's great. Yeah, it's never over. You're always
right. Just to say that, like, yes, I don't. I think that sometimes even in moments where you're doing a job that you hate, or you feel like you're a professional dead end, or whatever, that there still may be like a person that God is calling you to reach out to in that work environment, or a way that you can advocate for someone who's having a hard time in that context or scenario. Like, and I think your other question about disqualification, though, is a much harder one, because people can be shut out from certain professional opportunities for discriminatory practices totally beyond their control.
Yeah.
And that's a very real sign of like a world that continues to be broken by sin and evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's just hard.
It was good seeing Michael just in passing. I remember before this whole pandemic thing happened, there was this video of a newscaster who was working from home, but his children and his wife came in through the door, and it was so funny, and it still is, but it's like been my experience during the pandemic, and it's just a common occurrence that we're all working from home and doing things, and hope things happen. Okay, two last things. Is there anything else you want to say about Vocation? It's been great hearing your story. We've covered a lot. Anything that's burning that you wanted to mention, or are we pretty good?
One last thing about a conversation about not having, the part of the conversation where we talked about not having an imagination for something. For most of my life, I've been deathly afraid of public speaking. Hate it. Like, I still to this day, like right before I preach, I think I'm going to throw up every time. Just like start like, have this like visceral body reaction, like, oh, not again. But then, when you're called to do something, even when it's uncomfortable, that God equips you, the Holy Spirit gives you what you need in that moment. So just, I would encourage folks to not be afraid, and to say, if you think like, oh, I could never possibly do that. I can never possibly invite that person to come to church with me, or I can never ask them if they want to pray together or do a Bible study together. Just, allow yourself to ask the question, why not? Like, you've got all that you need. You really do.
That's awesome. Where could our folks go to learn more about the work you do, or maybe even support your work? Do you have any places you might be able to point them to?
Yeah, absolutely. If you know of a child who might benefit from being part of a school community like ours, go to sasweb.org and check us out. We're doing really great work. We start school really soon here. But, I've been working with our administrative team on developing protocol and programming so we can easily flip back and forth between virtual learning and in-person learning. I guess what I'm trying to say is I I think if you're interested in learning about more, just like go to our website, give me a call. You can get my contact info from Jamie. I would love to talk to you, whether we talk about SDS or not. Because I think these conversations around vocation are especially important right now, where a lot of us are feeling unmoored and unprepared for the moment that we're in. A lot of those things we're used to relying upon have been stripped away. But this is also a time where God is calling us to do and to be in new ways. And
Yeah.
we know very well, I know very well just because I know myself, like I've never needed the good news more.
Yeah. That's awesome, Molly. Yeah, sasweb.org.
Yep, you got it.
And if anyone wants your contact info, I'll broker that with them.
Please do. We'd love to talk to you.
Thanks so much for sharing your life. I mean, I'm so glad you're there. I'm glad you and Michael are there, and Ezra and new baby, 1 weeks.
Yes, baby
in
to
the journey.
be.
Yes, I'm just really glad to know you and to know your story a little bit more tonight and to be able to share it with our community here at St. John's. So thanks for everything, Molly, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to be part of this. And I'll continue to keep you all in my prayers in the days and weeks ahead.
Awesome.
And pray for us, please. We need all we can get.
Will do. All right. Thank you, Molly.
Thanks, Jamie.